as Colette said, we have a really fun selection of wines to share with you tonight. I hope some of you maybe have one, maybe even a couple of them, and we'll be tasting them in pairs. I'm really pleased that we've got Peter Dean from the buyer with us to taste, because it also takes the pressure off me, which is great. So anyway, without any further ado, I'll kick off with introducing the first pair. So we've got 2 bottles here tonight. I'm going to just show them to the screen, otherwise my marketing team led by Colette will probably tell me off. I don't know whether you can see those on, I guess, I don't know whether it's your right, my right, your left, whatever. We've got the Prosecco, which comes from Le Colture winery, and in my other hand was the Corny & Barrow Sparkling Blanc de Blanc. Now, we'll start with the Prosecco. It's quite interesting, this one, as a Prosecco, because it's DOCG, which is the premium style of Prosecco. Most Prosecco that's produced comes from DOC area. DOCG is the sort of inner zone with a lot of hillside vineyards, which are fundamentally better in terms of wine production, and Peter's going to touch on that. But all these, all the vines that this winery has, which is Le Colture, the Ruggieri family, who have had these vines, been in this area since maybe 1500, are all grown on hillsides, and they have a fantastic attention to detail in their sites. And I think that you can tell that from this wine, which is really worth just a couple of extra pounds per bottle. Peter, you've tasted this, haven't you? What do you think of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you've just mentioned that the Italians have been trying for some time to make a distinction within the Prosecco category. And I think for a lot of people, particularly in the UK, they see Prosecco as something that should only cost £6. But there is a definite distinct quality difference between this wine and something that you would pay so little for. And that's also where the fruit comes from. So a lot of general Prosecco is grown on flat land, and the DOCG tends to be from very steep slopes with very poor soil, which is always a very good sign for grape growing. You tend to get more interesting fruit grown in those areas. In terms of the actual wine, it's almost see-through. It clearly smells like Prosecco. But I think this wine will appeal to people who like Prosecco and just want to take it a little step further. It's not one that you would get a dozen bottles out at a party. This is much more sitting outside and tasting it and thinking about, what are they trying to do here? What's the winemaker trying to do here? It is serious winemaking going on. It's a very gastronomic wine. When you put it on the palate, I won't shock you by trying to do it now, but you get a real effervescence. You get a real sort of sense of the soil from which it comes from, a real stony minerality quality to it, at the same time as having some sort of ripe orchard fruit.
I think I might use your tasting notes when next I'm writing something about it. What I really like about this is the quality of the bubbles. They're so fine, almost end up with an impression of sort of light creaminess from it, because it's such a fine bubble. It's not coarse. It doesn't sort of hit you, and it's not a sort of acid attack. And I think that that's obviously the process, and I think it's the quality of the fruit. I mean, they grow all their fruit, and that's another thing I think I ought to mention as a takeaway point for people if they're not familiar with it. This is, as I mentioned, a producer that has all their own vineyards. They are, farming all their own fruit, and you can see on the label of producers who do this what appears to an English person to be, who doesn't speak Italian, as dot and then ag dot, which is azienda agricola, which means it's a proper winery, a vineyard only wine producer, and they make everything themselves. And there is the sort of French equivalent, etc. But if you don't know if you know what to look for, then it's quite helpful. And that, together with DOCG, which is that, as you said, that extra stamp of quality, I think that maybe is a way to point people in the right direction, because there are 13 million bottles of DOCG Prosecco. I think last year that landed in the UK, 40 million or something in total. Is that about right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, Brut's drank, I think it was just over 39 million bottles of Prosecco as a whole. So a third of DOCG, which is really not bad.
It's worth mentioning that the G, because the Italians, it's quite a complicated system, but if you just simplify it and say the G stands for guarantee. So there's a guarantee over the DOC, and they introduced DOCG really to just make that distinction between this huge category of DOC Prosecco. So the G is a guarantee of quality.
Yeah. So it's just not just special, it's like special.
It goes to 11.
That's right, it goes to 11. Turning the volume up. Shall we move to the next wine, which is the Corny and Barrow Sparkling Blanc de Blanc. Now, this is in our own label range and is often sold as part of a mixed case, but is a surefire party wine at this time of year. A lot of our customers buy it for weddings and so forth, for family gatherings, for barbecues. Obviously, we're a bit curtailed in all of that at the moment, but it is generally such a crowd-pleasing wine. It's easy, it's fresh, it's quite delicate sort of orchard fruit, and it's a little bit different to Prosecco. We've had it in our range for about 20-25 years, obviously when I was still in primary school, and we helped define the recipe with our producer, and it's made from a number of grape varieties in a sort of regional blend. And I think it's quite interesting because it's somewhere between a Prosecco and a sort of more grown up, not that Prosecco isn't grown up, you know what I mean. It's between a Prosecco and maybe champagne or an entry-level champagne of that kind. Also because it's made in the traditional method, like champagne. So it's got that savoury character.
Yeah, no, I think you said it earlier, Rebecca, it's a party wine. And what I've tried to do with my tasting is to pick the glass that I would best suit this in. And I think this is, you know, I love these old-fashioned coupes. And it instantly says that you're just going to have a lot of fun with this wine. I think in terms of the category, you're in Cremant territory. For me, Cremant basically spells value for money. I think with this, the price is what, £13.50. It's incredibly good value. In terms of the actual taste of it, you really get this creaminess coming through from where it's spent 12 months on the lease. And there are times where it's a little kind of almost cream soda coming through. I know the questions on previous sessions, a lot of people have asked about what you would serve with these wines. And I think with the Prosecco, it would be like Enoteca nibbles, you know, bits of ham, cheese, bread straws. With this, I would do it with a cream tea. I think I would do give your high tea some zip. Everyone in lockdown's been doing their baking skills. So, you know, why don't you have your prawn sandwiches and your ham sandwiches, scones and cream, nothing too sweet. This has got 15, 16 grams of sugar. So, you don't want to go too sweet on the cake. But I just think to make your high tea special, it'd be great fun.
I love that idea. I'm going to invite but you did just very neatly plant a little factoid idea in my mind, because we all love factoids, and that's the thing about the extra dry. Now, somebody has said to me when I said, "Oh, look, try this DOCG Prosecco. It's extra dry. It's really delicious." So I don't like extra dry. I like it when it's just a little bit. I don't like things that are really, really dry. And I said, "Well, no, because by anomaly in the sparkling wine world, extra dry is less dry than Brut on the label." And I think that's really, really confusing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
You can see it here on the bottle. I mean, it says extra dry. And so people say, "Oh God, no, I'm not going to drink that. It's far too dry and austere for me." Whereas in fact, a little bit of producers leave a little bit of sweetness in the bottle to balance the natural acidity of sparkling wines, because sparkling wines have to have that high acidity, but what the sort of a little bit of sweetness does, a little bit like, I don't know, putting a spoonful of sugar in you know, in your ragu or something, you know, it takes the edge off the acid. So we've got an interesting pair here. So we didn't go for a champagne in this lineup, but we do have 2 champagne method sparkling wines here. And the first one is from Argentina, which is not a very common destination or origin for sparkling wines. There isn't so much made, and a lot of it is consumed domestically, and a lot in Brazil. But this is made, I'll just show you the bottle here if you can see it, just so I don't get told off. So this is the bottle, and it comes from a winery we've been working with now, based in Mendoza, for about 20 years. I wish my colleague Margot Carpentier was here to tell me the exact year, because she'll remember. But anyway, they are very, very good partners of ours, and their previous winemaker had spent a long time with Chandon, the outpost of Moet and Chandon in Argentina, and he had learnt how to grow grapes particularly well for sparkling wine in Argentina. And when he moved to Ruca Malen to become the winemaker, one of the conditions was that they would allow him to make a sparkling wine. So he did. And I think we were one of the first lucky recipients, or I could say guinea pigs, of his wine, which is made exactly like champagne, and using the champagne grape varieties, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in this case, no Pinot Meunier, which is the third grape often used in champagne for those of you who are champagne lovers. And so this 75% Pinot and 25% Chardonnay, aged for 18 months in the bottle sur latte, and then disgorged, and it's had a couple of years in bottle now. I think the base wine is 2016 with a bit of reserve, so it has a little bit of older wine in there from an older vintage, just to give it a bit more depth. Peter, what did you think when you tasted this?
Without trying to repeat what you were just saying, I think as soon as you smell and taste this wine, it's clear that the people have got champagne know-how, because they're doing absolutely everything right. The grapes are grown at a high altitude, so you're getting fantastic acidity there. And as you mentioned, that, you know, it's on the lease for 18 months. And another really interesting point, I think, is that they keep it in the bottle for 6 months after disgorgement. Disgorgement, you know, when you take the sediment out of a bottle of sparkling, it's like open heart surgery. It really, really affects the wine in a huge way. And it's quite an important point, because if you have a sparkling wine, champagne, very soon after disgorgement, it doesn't taste so good. So they're doing absolutely everything right here. It's got much more colour than the previous 2 wines. I put it in a more serious tulip wine, so you can get the benefit of the bead, which is very elegant. You're getting a little bit more sort of breadiness on the nose, a little bit more nuttiness. You've still got fruit that are kind of getting raspberry from that. And it's got this fantastic tart au citron kind of finish, or lemon tart to you. But, you know, sort of, it's got that lovely, sharp, acidic citron, which makes you want to go and have another sip. It's kind of refreshing at the same time. I liked it a lot. As you're saying, I don't think of sparkling wine when I think of Argentina, but I think I might do now after trying this.
Oh, that's fantastic soundbite, which I'm going to mentally snip. I do think they've done a really great job with this wine, actually, so thank you. I mean, I think it has been a work in progress for them, because it's trying to, you know, because Argentina is pretty damn hot, and, you know, they've really had to change things to make this work and to produce a wine that has that sort of natural freshness and so forth, and to find balance in it. So it's lovely to hear that. Do you have you tasted many sparkling wines from that area? Or?
Oh, I haven't. No, from the Uco Valley. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
Pretty high altitude. If you weren't because you tasted it yesterday.
Mm.
You didn't know where it was from.
That's a good question.
Where
You could be mistaken for thinking Old World. It's got a lovely fruit profile. It's got a lot of detail in the wine and complexity, which makes me kind of think Old World. Yeah, I might put that in. I might put that in France, perhaps.
It's interesting, isn't it, to try these different wines from different places.
Yeah, but then, it's what 1695.
Yeah.
It's very good value. Yeah. And there's some sparkling wines coming out of Germany that's quite similar. Some of the top level sect also where people have come from champagne houses and are now taking that know-how to Germany. You're getting a similar kind of refinement in the wine, which is really promising. That's
really interesting. Would if you were sort of with a winemaker suddenly, from one day to the next, would you like to see a wine with more of that sort of toasty, bready quality, so more aging on the lees, or do you think that you'd stick to the style which has 18 months or something, so it's kind of delicately a bit savoury, but would you push it to be kind of doing it longer like champagne, or?
To me, this is in between. This is in between the wines that we've tried and the one we're about to try, which is, had 7 years on the lees. I'm a great fan of horses for courses. If you've got a dinner party, a crowd full of people, a room full of people, I'm not sure you're going to bring out wines which have, been on the lees for 7-8 years. It kind of, this to me would be a good celebration wine and a good way to start a dinner party. So I probably wouldn't go, if I was a winemaker, I probably wouldn't go further down the sort of secondary and tertiary notes. I think that's doing what it set out to do very well. It's very well made.
Yeah, well, we're working with the wine. We really hope we can make greater success, and a bit of a shout out actually for Argentina and its different capabilities. Anyway, let's move on to our last wine, which is homegrown. It's from Breaky Bottom, which is, and this wine is a particular favourite of mine, but all the wines from Breaky Bottom are favourites of mine, so this is just my favourite. We've been working with Breaky Bottom now for a couple of years. It's an absolutely extraordinary wine estate. I was telling you, Peter, yesterday about it. It's tiny. It's near Lewes in the South Downs, in a sort of little, a bottom. I'm going to tell you what a bottom is now. A bottom is apparently a dry chalk valley in Sussex, old Sussex vernacular. But Breaky Bottom has been, this particular area or little place was actually in the Doomsday Book, has been around for centuries and centuries. And it's a tiny estate planted by Peter Hall in the early 1970s. And he's still got their original plantings of his vines, a hybrid called Céval Blanc. And he also has plantings of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, the Champagne varieties. But it's a tiny, tiny place, just a few hectares, 2.3 hectares. And I just have such a soft spot for these wines because they're idiosyncratic. Only, a few thousand bottles made of each wine. There are just a few thousand bottles made every year, obviously. And I just absolutely love these wines. Peter, you tasted this one for the first time yesterday. What do you think of it?
Absolutely. Well, idiosyncratic, that's exactly what I would have said. I was going to say quirky. Now, I think the owner of Breaky Bottom is tuned in, so I apologise. A friend from Lewes years ago said, there's this fantastic winery near me, you've got to try it. And I said, what is it? And he said, Breaky Bottom. And the name really put me off. It just put me off, and that's my loss. It is quirky. I love the fact that he's named the wine, you know, after a friend who was this comedian who used to speak to the sheep. 30% of it is Seyval Blanc, which is very unusual, I think, in a wine of this quality. Now, the glass I've chosen is a Tops Alto glass, because what you've got in your glass is a serious wine. This is, I was blown away by this. I was so impressed with it. You've got so much going on. The nose just, you just want to dive into it. It's got, and it's kind of got a slight malty, I got a little bit of kind of malt loaf in a nice way, sort of like a malty side to that. But it's kind of got it bready and biscuit, a little bit of lemon shortbread about it. You just want to dive into this. And then on the palate, you've got the depth that you would expect with so long on the lees. But you've got this fantastic acidity cutting through, which is everything about English sparkling wine. And I think what English sparkling wine has got right in the last few years is they've got the dosage right. A few years ago, they were like battery acid. They were just too austere. And what they've been doing at Breaky Bottom, interestingly, is to pick the grapes really, really late, which gives you the fruit profile, but then retains this acidity. The other thing I really love about it is it comes from pure chalk, and there's an element on the nose. It's almost like wet chalk, again, in a really nice way, in a fresh way. So for a wine that's been, you know, so beautifully made, you're talking about a vintage champagne by no other name, but not just a vintage champagne, a grower vintage champagne. So, you know, a grower champagne is one effectively where it's meticulously made, it's handcrafted, and it speaks of the land from which it comes, and this does. I was so impressed.
It's lovely to hear that. And it's interesting what you say about that chalk element. First time I drove over the down and down into Breaky Bottom and was sort of greeted by, you know, lots of gambling lambs everywhere, and saw sort of this cross section of the hill, which is just chalk. I mean, pure chalk. It's just extraordinary, and you do get this sense of that. I think you put it rightly. There is a sort of wet chalk aroma that comes out of it, but in a really, you know, like mayflowers or that kind of blossom.
Yeah.
I'm at the risk of sounding like Jilly Gordon here, but it's just such lover, obviously. But it's just such a delicious example of English sparkling wine, and you know, I absolutely adore it. But this is bottle 325 of 2,604 made, so that gives you an idea of the scale of it. I don't know which numbered bottle you've got, Peter, with you.
It's back there. I'll have a look in a minute. I mean, it's quite interesting. I'm often asked by people what is really good value for money, and this wine at £37 is the most expensive wine that we've tasted tonight, but I would say it's the best value for money, because the quality is extraordinary. I mean, you're talking about very, very high end, where you normally pay 60, 70 pounds for this. That's not to decry the other wines. They're also good value, but it's interesting sometimes when the more expensive wine, I think, offers the most value. In terms of food pairing, I would love to have this with just a whole crab. And you know that when you go Mediterranean, or when we're allowed to go back to the Mediterranean, where you just get a crab, a pot of mayo, some bread, and a hammer, and you know, it doesn't need anything too complex. You know, you don't want to detract from the quality of the wine. So for me, that would be a great compliment. And there's a sweetness in the wine that would be complemented with, you know, lobster or but crab. I think fresh crab.
Isn't it funny that sometimes the more refined and more special the wine, the less complicated the food needs to be?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
did a launch of Salon Champagne in a fish and chip shop in London.
Okay.
Years ago. There's something about that kind of pairing which I think works so well. But I'm you know, it's lovely to hear you say these things about all these 4 wines and such a different range of wines here.
Yeah, yeah.